Welcome to Mental and Emotional Health 2, Thinking Habits. To begin this video, we're going to look at how a lifetime of learning builds well-worn pathways in our brain, which I call thinking habits. Next, we'll see how these thinking habits cause us to think and feel automatically, as though we're living from psychological muscle memory. It's as though we go through life singing the same old tune. And finally, I'll give a personal example. Hi, in the last video, I offered a message of hope and gave a little preview of what's coming up. Now in this video, I want to set the scene for the rest of the series. And to do that, we'll be talking about thinking habits. We live and function in the world because of learning. If we didn't learn, we would have to calculate almost infinite amounts of data just to be able to drink our morning coffee. When a concert pianist first learns to play, she is slow and clumsy. But as she practices, she is consciously building the structures into her brain that will one day let her perform at the highest level. So 30 years later, playing to thousands in the Royal Albert Hall, she doesn't need to calculate the position and velocity of each note. Now she responds unconsciously out of these structures in her brain called neural pathways. And I like to think of these neural pathways as simply thinking habits. Musicians who play without consciously thinking about it are sometimes said to be using muscle memory. But Dr. Tori Olds explains that we also have a kind of psychological muscle memory. And this psychological muscle memory really shapes our experience of reality. In other words, the learning process that enables us to play an instrument or drive a car on autopilot or play tennis is the same process that gives us our automatic thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, some which are helpful and some which are not. For example, one day Susie's boss says to her, "Please can we meet in my office after lunch?" Immediately her heart starts racing, her palms are sweating, she's even having mental images of being fired and leaving the office in disgrace. Later, the boss gives the same message to her colleague, Sarah. But unlike Susie, Sarah has a little ping of excitement. A thought shoots through her head. At last, he's going to tell me how awesome I did on that last assignment. Well, that's psychological muscle memory in action. Two different people having two different automatic reactions to exactly the same situation because of the different pathways that have been built into their brain. So because we all have different thinking habits, we perceive the world differently, and therefore we all have a different experience of life. It's as though we all live in our own little bubbles of reality, which sometimes crash into each other, like when we have arguments and relationship problems. Another way to think about our thinking habits is like grooves in a record. They keep us singing the same old tune. But not only that, the more we play the tune, the deeper the grooves. That's because our thoughts, feelings, and decisions are constantly reinforcing these neural pathways as they take up more and more physical real estate in our brain. This is why it can be so hard to change a habit or a strong opinion, because our conscious choosing mind, which is trying to do the right thing, is battling against well-developed physical structures that have been built into our brain over a lifetime. I used to experience so much stress and anxiety from hidden habits in my thinking, which were well established from a young age. For example, one of these thinking habits had me convinced that my value as a person is not fixed, but that it has to be earned by striving to be perfect, by performing, by doing all I could to earn the approval of others, and by constantly comparing myself to make sure I measured up. Now, most people know that this is a complete load of crap, but because the thinking habit was so well ingrained, it was totally true for me, and it stains my view of myself and the world, and it made me feel terrible without understanding why. It's as though I lived with a set of invisible glasses on my face. The glasses themselves made no difference to the real world that was around me, but they had a huge impact on how I experienced the world because they distorted my view of reality. But thankfully, the process of learning that created this distorted view is the same process that allowed me to change it. I updated the old thinking habit with new information which brought about transformation. Now I know deeply that people are equally valuable and lovable, and nothing we say or do, or our talents, or our looks, or achievements, or our qualifications, or the size of our house, or number of our friends, or anything else has any influence over our worth and value whatsoever. As a man of faith, I believe that we are all uniquely created in the image of God and loved more than we can imagine before we even say or do anything. So just breathing is enough. And what a relief it was to really learn that. So what do we take away from this? Well, we take away hope. We take away that the brain is flexible, so we don't have to stay enslaved to old neural pathways or thinking habits. The science of neuroplasticity and memory reconsolidation, which we'll touch on in later videos, proves that unhelpful, outdated thinking habits can be transformed. And this isn't just true for some people. Already built into your brain are the mechanisms which are needed to create change. This is the nature of the human mind. It has the capacity to transform itself. Now, creating this change is not easy. In fact, it can be really hard work, but it's also not complicated. And I promise you that the long-term gain far outweighs the short-term pain. In short, transforming our thinking habits will transform our life. And in this series, we're going to learn how. Key points. Our thinking habits have a huge impact on our quality of life because they keep us stuck in our own little bubbles of reality. It's as though we are aeroplanes that are stuck on autopilot. Even when we want to fly somewhere new, our thinking habits make sure we arrive at the same old destination over and over. But because the brain has the capacity to transform itself, we can update these old thinking habits so that they work for us rather than against us. Question: are there problems in your life which might come from a distorted view of reality? Now it's time to pop over to the next video where we'll kick off chapter 1, where do the problems start? Or if you want something more on today's topic, keep watching. Here's a fun illustration of the way thinking habits shape our view of reality. Check out squares A and B. Now, what if I told you they're exactly the same shade? Have a look at them carefully. The mind has changed the appearance of square B to fit with its learning about how the world works. This is psychological muscle memory in action. Now we know rationally, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that these squares are the same shade, but good luck trying to convince your thinking habits to believe you. We can see this same process play out in real life. For example, imagine a woman who grew up with critical parents. Her husband comes home from work a bit stressed, and no matter how much she tells herself that her husband is kind and just tired, her psychological muscle memory interprets his mood, his facial expression and tone of voice as a criticism of her. And so she reacts in anger. Coming back to the squares, it's as though the woman knows that the square is dark, but her thinking habits will only let her see it as light.